Hello. Thank you for being here. We have a lot to share, so we'll move along quickly. Thank you. Usually after lunch, our energy is down, but that will not be the case here. I'm your chair. I'm John Peede. I'm the president of Ashland University and Ashland Theological Seminary and the former chairman of the National Endowment of Humanities. And it is a pleasure to be on this panel with three scholars who have a lot more wisdom than that you could find in this moment gathered at any campus, I believe. So thank you. We'll start with Elizabeth Coffman. She is at Loyola, Chicago, and she is a professor in film and digital media at the university in the School of Communications. She is an active documentary filmmaker, as we will hear, and a film scholar. She was brave enough to be an interim dean, I noticed. There's hazard pay for that. And in 2021, her NEH-sponsored film, Flannery, on the writer, of course, Flannery O'Connor, was the first ever winner of the Ken Burns Library of America Award. And well done. And also, as I believe we'll hear, she was a co-executive producer for Ethan Hawke's biopic, Wildcat. So thank you for being here. We are also fortunate to have Reverend Mark Bosco, and Mark is Vice President of Mission and Ministry at Georgetown University in DC. He has served as a professor of both English and theology, and also he was the director of the Hanks Center for Catholic Intellectual Heritage. His scholarly interests, as you can see up across the campus, rather, in the bookstore, is Graham Greene, of course, Flannery O'Connor, among others, and he was the co-director of O'Connor. So to have both of the directors here with us is a rare treat. And he is a Jesuit of the USA Central and Southern Providence. So thank you. And as I see, you're in their 25th year of service as a father.
That is true.
Yes, well. Yes. That's something to be applauded as well. And lastly, our third, we have an interim dean in 25 years of priesthood. There's a lot of competition. And Angela Alaimo O'Donnell is, I think, some of us heard at dinner, the role, all of you, but I really want to acknowledge in particular how central you've been to keeping this series alive, these conferences. She is a writer, a poet, a professor at Fordham in New York City. She teaches creative writing, English, American Catholic Studies. She is the associate director of the Curran Center for American Catholic Studies. She's an author of 11 books, and again, books that are here, and that includes Dear Dante, Holy Land, and other books, and of course, 2 books on O'Connor, which we can do the shameless plug for, yes, for, and
third one.
Yes, and a third one, the biography as well. So I am going to get out of the way. We look forward to hearing your remarks. We're going to have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. Questions, not statements, right? And we'll move quickly through them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's just an honor to be here at this conference and thinking out loud about the Catholic imagination and how much it has informed both our scholarly work and our creative filmmaking work. And as Mark learned during the process of making our documentary, it's very much a collaborative enterprise from the start, where we're researching, where we're seeking funds from the NEH to distribution And there are a number of people here in the audience I know who were graduate students when some of this was going on and probably helped us with transcription. So it's very much been a collective enterprise getting this going. So we are delighted to talk about it. And I think to get us started, why don't we just look at the trailer for the documentary? So we're going to start with the history of the documentary, what it meant, how we were all involved, and then we'll move through a little history and then into Wildcat to think about how we actualize the Catholic imagination in film. All right, let me call up the trailer here. And this was on American Masters in 2021.
One would have called out perhaps the most naturally gifted of American novelists, Flannery O'Connor.
Okay, it is. After we set up for half an hour, it's not playing. That's all right.
We might have to change it.
Exit from screen.
Visual settings again. Go there.
Sorry about this.
God, he's so fast. He knows what he's doing.
I know.
It's great.
Okay, do that.
Start at the
And
beginning
play.
again. Oh, let's go.
What did there's hard to find?
Wise blood, mystery and madness.
Everything that rises must be rich.
She's one of the best writers of the 20th century. I've read everything that she's written.
Flannery O'Connor is one of the writers least afraid to look at the darkness.
We had an act put up the children screamed in frenzy of delight, but nobody's killed during the stars in this hunt.
You think it's this bitter old alcoholic who's writing these really funny, dark stories, and then you find out she's a woman and then she's devoutly religious.
Flannery O'Connor was born in Savannah, Georgia, into an Irish Catholic community.
You get someone who's writing out of a specific time, specific set of manners. What she found was history.
I think that a theory of fiction describes an action only in order to reveal a mystery.
How is she going to find the stories that she knows she needs to tell? And how is she going to tell them?
I do not want to be lonely all my life, but people only make us lonelier by reminding us of God. It's unbelievable. She was so sick.
She never stopped writing.
It was the illness that made her the writer that she is.
I feel that the grotesque quality of my own work is intensified by the fact that I'm a Southern and Catholic writer.
She's really funny. She's often funny in a very dire way.
She ignored the disapproval of her religion. She ignored the disapproval of her fiction. She just saw the mystery of the craziness.
Okay. Let's get back up here. And Mark, you want to take it and cover some of our chronology here?
Thank you very much, and thanks for being here. So I was always intrigued with Flannery O'Connor, reading her stories in high school, rereading them in college and in graduate school. And I like to say I'm a kind of an OCD kind of scholar, and so it's like I was voraciously trying to read everything I could, or anything that anybody ever said about Flannery O'Connor got into a file on my computer. So in 2013, I didn't know Elizabeth very well, but we both were there pretty much at the same time, and I said to her, "Listen, I'm doing a Flannery O'Connor conference in New York. Would you do some interviews with people, because there might be something here to be done, especially because a good friend of mine, Chris O'Hare, had known Sally Fitzgerald. If you know Flannery O'Connor history, you know how important Sally Fitzgerald is to her. And he had done about 2 hours, 2.5, actually a little more than that, 3 hours of film of people who were alive to Flannery O'Connor's time. And Sally had said to Chris, who was a movie producer in London at the time, but had known Sally from Harvard, said, "Listen, these folks are going to die. Can you get them on film?" And so he did, and at really top quality. And when we saw these were the kind of the backbone of our documentary. And I asked actually Elizabeth then if she would look at this. And once she saw this, these documentary interviews, we thought we might actually have a film. And
I rolled my eyes at first because you were like, can you help me make a doc out of a conference? And I'm like, oh, that does not sound very interesting. But we did do some interviews at the conference that actually one made it in the final cut.
Yeah.
But then, as you're saying, you showed me these historic interviews of Sally and Bob Giroux, and I went, it's an NEH project.
So in 2015, we started really trying to move into raising money for it. It was a lot of fundraising to get us done. We were both working full-time as professors. And then Angela came out with this book here, Fiction Fired by Faith. And I was looking for one author who could condense the role that the Catholic imagination was playing in some of her stories. And I said, first of all, my colleagues have to read your book. And then we got to know each other. And really we got to know each other through this conference
at USC.
At USC. And so you became a real kind of your book became a muse, especially for the early parts of our film. And we brought you to be one of the many narrators of O'Connor's life.
Yeah, and I'm just struck by, we were just talking about the collective enterprise that a film is. That is the opposite of what an academic book is. There is no collective enterprise. You're working all by yourself. Same thing when you're working on a book of poems. And so it's really quite thrilling to have it picked up by people who enable it, use it in order to shape a project that is a communal project and that becomes available to a lot of people. I think of Flannery's mother who says, Flannery, don't you think you'd like to write some books that a lot of people would like to read? And it's like, yeah, it's nice to do that. It's nice to have a book that gets into a film. And that's happened with this film and also with the Ethan Hawke film as well. So I'm delighted to have, I call myself the accidental consultant on these films because I just sort of lucked into being able to participate in this wonderful process of creating this really beautiful film.
And it's not just the information, the expository information in your book. It's the structure of your book too, because I was resisting reading it. I had read Brad Gooch's giant biography, which is fabulous, of Flannery O'Connor. Lots of great information. We were interviewing people and working from that. And Mark said, you have to read Angela's book. You have to read it. And finally, I read it, and the way you've structured it helped us with our script and helped us think about structuring her biography and integrating the stories with it, which is what you do in your book. So it truly was an inspiration for us. And we'll play this section on Temple of the Holy Ghost that you've done research for and your book informed, and just to see, and Angela, you appear in this as well too. Okay.
I would say her signature story is a temple of the Holy Ghost because it envisions this young girl who is clearly a version of Flannery O'Connor.
The story is very provocative in exactly the way that O'Connor's stories usually are. For one thing, she incorporates what she calls a freak, a person who is not like everybody else, a person who is radically nonconformist. Two visiting cousins go to see at the fair this intersex person.
The two girls are singing in Latin. They're Catholic girls, they go to Catholic school. The boys in the town they call it Jew singing.
The child in the story is too young to go, so she doesn't actually get to see the person, but she is fascinated by this idea of someone who can be both male and female, yet neither male nor female. This child's faith life is in some ways a version of Flannery's own faith life in which he has doubts.
He could strike you this way, but he has none. Amen.
She decides, I could never be a saint, but she could be a martyr if they killed her quick. And then she thinks about the ways in which she would be willing to die. You know, boiled and boiled maybe, attacked by animals, probably being torn apart by animals.
If you went to Mass, you heard those prayers over and over again. You were encouraged to pray silently, even oddly to contemplate at a very young age.
Her mind began to get quiet and then empty. But when the priest raised the monstrance with the host shining ivory-colored in the center of it, she was thinking of the tent at the fair that had the freak in it. You are God's temple, don't you know?
What's happening here is something so remarkable that the profane meets the sacred. And it's within that comic medium that these stories operate. This is the way Flannery covers. You either get it or you don't. And if you don't, then don't go to the carnival.
God's Spirit has a dwelling in you, don't you know? Amen.
So one of the things we wanted to do is have the film itself convey Flannery O'Connor's personality. And so it was really important, and this is where Elizabeth is a documentarian, and her husband Ted Hardin, who is also does film at Columbia College in Chicago, they came together and they were really saying, if we're going to make an hour and a half or a film, how do we make this really engage all the senses? How do we see the film itself as giving the story, entering into Flannery's life? So you'll see that we, just in that key thing, we have people who know Flannery O'Connor, people who admired her. I literally was just going around the country with Elizabeth saying, we have to interview Tommy Lee Jones. We have to interview Alice Walker. We have to interview. So all these people who thought that Flannery O'Connor was important and was their own sense of a kind of model or muse for their art, you know. We did not get Bruce Springsteen, I have to say. I'm still bitter about that. But he got his music, but he was on Broadway. He just refused to give us an interview. And it was also the animation, because Flannery O'Connor's own love of cartoons and that early part of her life, we thought, let's use also animation to kind of portray some of her stories. We were also only given permission to do that. We couldn't act out any of it from the Trust's directions. So we couldn't create anything new, but we could do animation. So again, in the voiceover, we could do the voiceover. So there was a way of how do we weave all these things so that we got the sense of Flannery O'Connor as a young girl going through her time with lupus, living in the South during the dismantling of the Jim Crow era. Her Catholicism, I think that was my special kind of, like I was going to be the person who made sure that the Catholicism got right. Not that it wouldn't be in there, but that it had a sense that there was a rightness about it, and certainly just being a woman writer of such value.
Yeah, and I also love the way that you used the illustrations. Because we had a sneak peek at Fordham when the film was being worked on, and I made my students go to it, of course, and then afterwards I treated them as a focus group. So what did you like about this film? And they, we love the drawings, we love the cartoons. And of course, that's very much in the spirit of O'Connor, because many people don't know, O'Connor did not begin as a writer, she began as a cartoonist. She would send her cartoons off to the New Yorker, and unfortunately they didn't get in, so she said, oh darn, I guess I'll be a writer instead. So I think it's quite brilliant to use O'Connor's cartoonish, and I mean that in the best sense, cartoonish sort of imagination to represent the stories. So it's another brilliant piece of work, I think.
We had 3 wonderful female animators who studied her cartoons and as well as read her fiction. I mean, one of our animators got a fellowship in Georgia and was studying the flora and the fauna, and so they really contributed. And this is part of my thinking about the Catholic imagination. I mean, we've had some great panels talking about the experiential nature of you know, George Saunders writing and reading, how do we get this experiential understanding of imagination through cinema, it includes sound design, right? Like we heard the lions roaring and the girls screaming, and I think, Angela, you want to talk about sound design later. You know, we've got music, we've got the voiceover, Mary Steenburgen's voiceover, she was just fabulous when we were recording her in terms of you know, just hitting every mark to be Flannery O'Connor. So all of these things to recreate the experience of her life and what she could have seen, what she felt, and what she was hearing. So that's all part of it.
And partly, how do we be a film that can try to translate the Southern grotesque, you might say, and really Elizabeth, not Flannery, Elizabeth Coffman's and Ted really did some great archival work, because sometimes we read Flannery O'Connor and say, well, that's just a little too off, right? That's just in her imagination. But as people who know her or her work, I mean, she found this through her daily life in Milledgeville, Georgia. So how can we kind of get the strangeness of the Southern grotesque? And you just want to talk a little bit about the archival stuff?
Sure. One of our big challenges, this is another reason we have the animation, is there's only one interview of Flannery O'Connor, and it's short, and it's in the film, and there aren't many photographs of her. So we did not have a lot of documentary footage to build a feature documentary from. So we went to motion graphics, we went to illustration, we went to animation, and we went to archival. I had some great archival researchers who are wonderful, who just found, you know, we gave her that sense of, okay, Flannery O'Connor-esque type sense of humor, and some of this goes with the Catholic imagination. Let's look for archival footage that kind of illustrates both the history in Georgia at the time, largely in the 1950s, some in the 1940s, her sense of humor, and some of the darkness that was going on. So we'll play an excerpt here. Actually, I'll show you a little excerpt, and you'll hear. This is also in the music, so we've got archival music as well as imagery. So I will let me play a little bit for you, and you'll see an adaptation done by PBS in the 80s, I believe, for her story, The Displaced Person. And there is the N-word is being used in it, so it's just a warning for you. But here's some of the archival.
What does a writer try to do in a short story? Or what does a writer try to do in a novel? What is the secret of writing?
Well, I think that a serious fiction writer describes an action only in order to reveal a mystery. Because he may be revealing the mystery to himself at the same time that he's revealing it to everyone else. And he may not even succeed in revealing it to himself. I think he must sense its presence.
Neither Flannery nor Regina ever expected to have to live together as adult women. Such a complicated relationship.
She was considered an eccentric. And yet, she was Miss Regina's daughter, and her manners were perfect. And they couldn't quite reconcile these two figures.
Mrs. O'Connor said to me, Mr. DeVue, why can't you get Flannery to write about nice people? I thought I saw to laugh, and I looked at Flannery up to the poker face. So I didn't laugh. My mother really was disappointed that her daughter was not a Southern belle, instead she was a writer.
She got to face Regina at the dinner table, who was still waiting for her to come out with Gone on the Wind, too.
From what I understand, she couldn't stand that movie when she was 14. Her mother was such a classic, closed-mind Southerner of that era. I feel, though, that Flannery had a great subject there, and that she did a lot of examination of that particular personality.
For years, I've been fooling the sorry people. Sorry people, all white trash and niggas that drain me dry.
I first discovered Flannery O'Connor's work after I saw the television adaptation of The Displaced Person.
The Displaced Person is about an immigrant family from Poland, post-war refugees who move into the South.
Who are you now? He comes over the water. Only one of them seems like to speak English. They're what it's called, displaced persons.
Regina never dreamed that she was a character in all of the stories. The stupid woman was herself.
Slowly but surely, the father figure from this refugee family starts to kind of take over the farm.
Screw.
The violence in the stories was something that was always clear to me as a symbolic act leading to transformations.
Even though she is recognizable in Mrs. McIntyre, Regina was not contained in those characters.
You want some kind of clear resolution of all these different conflicts, and she denies it to us.
I'm always irritated by people who imply that writing fiction is an escape from reality. It is a plunge into reality, and it's very shocking to the system.
But she's funny. She's really funny. And she's often funny in a very dire way. The laughter is the laughter of the skull on the memento mori on your desk.
Here it is. Notice the nuns in the background.
That's faith in your mother.
I mean, that was just when you got that piece of footage, we thought, oh my gosh, this is the 1950s in a very bizarre southern way. Was it Texas or was it Arkansas, I think?
So I think it was Texas, and I ran into Rick Pralinger, who's the founder of archive.org. I don't know if you know archive.org. It's a giant database. And he's not a man of many words, and I walked up to him and said, we're doing a documentary on Flannery O'Connor. Do you have any archival ideas? And he just said, mother throwing knives at daughter, Texas. And then he walked away. Yeah. And he knew immediately what we needed in terms of a Flannery O'Connor sensibility. So it was much appreciated. I also mentioned that I am a Protestant and born and raised Presbyterian, and so Mark and I would often, with Flannery O'Connor, if you know her work, you know how much the Protestant and the Catholic are themes in the story. So I think we use that energy pretty well in our as we were, going back and forth about the script. We never yelled. We just were, arguing about what goes in and out. And
yeah, because you can read Flannery O'Connor as a kind of a Southern Protestant, prophet, right? Herself and her characters. But and that's, I think, why I wanted to do this documentary, because I thought that was not the right story. It wasn't the complete story, right? How do we engage that Catholicism? I mean, there are a lot of dead bodies throughout her stories, right? And yet she's a devout woman who goes to Mass every single day, reads Thomas Aquinas for fun, and so how do we kind of get that into a story? And so that was part of the engagement.
So Mark, who demonstrated he's a natural producer, got interviews with people like Tobias Wolff, and this all helped us to tell the story. Well, as we were finishing the film and were, by the grace of God, and Flannery O'Connor won the first Library of Congress Ken Burns Award for the film in 2019. And then we had gained an NEH grant, which the head of American Masters said, you got to get an NEH grant. And we got turned down a couple of times, but then we finally got it. And John Parrish here was not involved at all in the gifting of the money. There was a separate committee. So but thank you to he was head of the NEH at that time, so I thought it was entirely appropriate to thank him there. But in 2020, as you can see, the George Floyd murder happened, and the pandemic happened, and the world changed. There were a number, Paul Eli published an article called How Racist Was Flannery O'Connor? It appeared in the George Floyd issue of the New Yorker magazine. We had some distributors who pulled out. Flannery O'Connor's name got removed from a dorm, Loyola, Maryland. And so there was a lot of negative feedback for those of us who were involved. I think Amy Osnauer is here.
And where's Amy?
Is Amy here? There you are. Amy's wonderful book was scheduled to come out that same day, your children's book that I hope you're talking about here. But Amy wrote one of the best pieces in response to the New Yorker piece, and I've quoted it here because Eli's piece also references Angela's book. In contrast to Eli's tendency toward omission, O'Donnell, in her wonderful Hold Up Your Radical Ambivalence book, her wonderful book devotes the first chapter to outlining the treatment of race in O'Connor criticism from 1970s to the present. So there are many people here in this room who've contributed to that history as well. So in our distribution of this film, this became a new kind of focus, and really in just about every interview we did, it was one of the first questions. So in mainstream journalism, it just was one of the first things that came up.
And that just preceded the publication of your research.
Actually, my book came out in June of 2020, and George Floyd was killed on May 25th of 2020. So it was just an accident. The book had been in process, and it came out at that time, and it met with, it's an academic book that was published by a small press. It would have been paid attention to by the Flannery O'Connor scholars in the room, and it would not have gotten the kind of wild attention that it got if it had not been picked up by this person who wrote this article in the New Yorker, who then proceeded to trash everyone who ever said anything about Flannery O'Connor, because he was the first person ever to think about Flannery O'Connor and race. No one else had ever thought about that. Whereas if you go back to the 1970s, there have been essays by, and also, by the way, Alice Walker thought about this, and Toni Morrison thought about this, and women and people of color thought about these things before this interesting guilt-ridden white man wrote this particular piece. So it's, the psychology of it, I understand it. You can see the cover of the New Yorker in which that article appeared. He was obviously commissioned to write a piece that was going to be about race, and it just so happened that your film had just come out and my book had just come out, and everything just looked like, it's like if you have a hammer, like everything looks like it needs to be hit, rather than looking at the subtle and careful work that had been put into all of these projects in representing what O'Connor says about race. So it was a moment for certain.
And I think what shaped the film, because the film was basically finished when your book came out, but we were in conversation with you telling us about your research, were people like Hilton Als and Alice Waters. Alice Waters, no, she does Walker. Waters is a food person. Sorry, Alice Walker. But we asked everybody we talked to. We asked them about that question, especially if they came from the African American community or had some scholarship in that area. And so we were trying to weave that in so that we thought we could do the best job to say, listen, Flannery O'Connor lived in the South. She lived and she breathed in the racism of Milledgeville, Georgia. It was part of the world. But she was also had this kind of Catholic cosmic vision of the world in which this was just the original sin of original sins and how did it work. So we were trying to always make sure that we had a balance, that it was part of the film. And we thought I still think we did a very fine job with it. At least it's very much adequate.
Well, from the beginning, and this is part of the, you know, the Protestant background, and our goals were from the very beginning, we wanted PBS, we wanted public broadcasting, and we wanted American Masters. And after, you know, we had an NEH grant, we were, had that stamp of approval, we had Ken Burns' stamp of approval, and American Masters, thankfully, hung in there after this article, damaging article came out and broadcast us in 2021. And then the next film that we also have a history with, pretty quickly thereafter, the distribution of the Flannery documentary, Ethan Hawke, the actor Ethan Hawke, and his daughter Maya Hawke had very much been obsessed with finding out who owned the rights to Flannery O'Connor's life story. They loved the prayer journal. Maya especially loved the prayer journal. She had auditioned with it. So Ethan and his production company got the rights to produce a biopic and take creative license with her life story, and got access, as we did. We were the first film to have full access to all of her fiction, to adapt it, and then the Hawks also got the rights for that.
Yeah. Also, are you going to play the trailer? Okay,
Yes,
great.
I will play the trailer.
With long silver streaks that looked like scaffolding, but no one was paying any attention to the sky.
Well, I don't understand why you don't want to write something that people would like to read.
Dear God, I want to write a novel. A good novel.
Miss O'Connor, sometimes I feel like you're trying to stick pins in your readers. I don't think you need to make them suffer in order to introduce them to the unusual way of mind learning.
Mary Flannery, you've been writing any cute stories lately?
I read that last one you sent your mama. You know, let's kind of meditate it on that.
Well, you weren't supposed to eat it.
You might want to consider being a little more friendly.
I tried to turn the other cheek, but my tongue was always in it. I didn't work.
Dressed. Nowadays, doctors don't blame young people that.
Dear God, please. I can never seem to escape myself unless I'm writing. Strangely, I'm never more myself than when I'm writing. Is there no way for me to disappear into something bigger? Lord, please grant me grace. Let me be your typewriter. Please give me one good story. I thought it was the end of any creation. Now I see it as only the beginning.
It must come easy for you.
It's like giving birth to a piano sideways.
He includes a lot of them. Yeah, I mean, I think most of us who are Flannery O'Connor fans were so excited and delighted to hear that Ethan Hawke was working on this film that was going to bring a very different genre of film, of course, than Mark and Elizabeth had produced, because this was going to be a work of imagination. A great documentary had already been produced. There was no need for him to make another one. And so he was interested in really exploring the imagination of Flannery O'Connor, the Catholic imagination of Flannery O'Connor, and how exactly was he going to go about doing this. I guess we can probably go to the third slide.
All right.
Yeah, so imagine I'm sitting at my kitchen table and I'm reading Variety magazine, and Ethan Hawke has written an article in which he, laments the fact that he's come across this article in the New Yorker by this writer who has said that Flannery O'Connor is a terrible racist, and he suddenly turns to Maya and says, "We can't make this movie. Why are we going to make a movie about a racist?" They were deeply disturbed by it, deeply troubled by it, until he said, And then I read this book by this professor, Angela O'Donnell, at Fordham University. And I'm sitting there, I showed it to my husband. I said, does that say what I think it says? Ethan Hawke is talking about my book. He said, yeah, that's what he says. In which he's, the book does what the article did not take the time to do, which was to situate O'Connor's cultural racism in the context of her world, the world that Mark and Elizabeth's film demonstrates so clearly. And as we know, O'Connor died when she was 39 years old, and she was on a journey towards, and she was living at the height of the civil rights movement, and she was living in a very, very stratified society with very deep, inburnt beliefs, as Flannery would say. And you don't recover from that overnight. That takes a long time. It's a long journey. Flannery was definitely on that journey, but she didn't get very much time. She died when she was 39. And so this is what we have to deal with. We have to deal with the fact that, yes, in her writings, there are remarks that we would consider racist. And yet, in her stories, she's writing these amazing prophetic stories in which she is listening to her better angel that knows that racism is a sin. She knows it very well because she herself is afflicted by it. And the stories in some way are the proving ground where she exposes white racism. She exposes all of the ugliness and the sinfulness of it, the soul-destroying power that it has, as something that needs to be rooted out. And she does this very successfully in some stories, like in Revelation, but you can see her doing it even in her earliest stories. Her very first story that she writes when she's at Iowa, called The Geranium, which she rewrote 4 times in the course of her life, and it's the last story that she worked on before she died, which is called Judgment Day. So obviously she was obsessed with this. She comes back to it over and over again with trying to get this right and understand it fully. She's reading books about this, the book by Tom Gossett, who actually almost lost his position at Mercer University because he was saying things that the South did not want to hear, like race is a concept, race is not a reality. He was writing the sort of ideas about race that now we understand, very much ahead of his time. So she writes to Tom Gossett and says, I'm reading your book, I'm finding it very interesting. This is like 3 months before she dies that she's reading this book. So we can see that she is struggling with this, and we see the struggle evident in her characters and in her stories. So God bless Ethan Hawke in not taking the New Yorker article, which was a very cartoonish version, of what the book was, and looked deeply and said, no, we can make this happen. So again, you write an academic book and you think, what difference is this going to make? And what a thrill and an honor it is to think, okay, this film would not exist if he didn't come across the book. So I felt like very, very delighted by that and hopeful. And then I thought, I'm going to write to him. And I did get his attention. One day I got an email that said, from Ethan Hawke. And I thought, darn, he's writing back. And I said, I'm the professor from Fordham. Would you consider premiering your film at Fordham? And he said, sure. And so we were able to do that in May, the New York premiere. We rented out a theater near our Lincoln Center campus, and we had about 350 people there, and Ethan came, and then he spent about a half hour with us afterwards, talking with us. And he did this at a number. We were not the only place. We were the first place, but not the only place where he did this across the country, because obviously this was a labor of love on both his part and on Maya's part to try to get this film out there and deal as honestly as he could in an hour and 20-minute film with who Flannery was. And I'm just curious, how many people have seen the film? Because I don't want to do any, okay, a number of you. Those of you who haven't, of course, are going to want to run out and stream it. You can stream it on a number of platforms. What's interesting to me about all of this is, and I'll just leave the New Yorker article alone after this, first of all, one of the things that's most annoying about it is when you Google the words Flannery O'Connor and racist, it's the first thing that comes up. Not any of that scholarship that goes back 40, 50 years, careful scholarship. This very quickly written series of night thoughts that this person has is what comes up. But I am very thrilled by the fact that my students discover this. I certainly don't send them to it. They discover it, and it has not aged well. They come in and they say, who is this guy, this virtue signaling guy, who is writing about Flannery O'Connor, as this terrible racist? And it's like, thank you, smart young people, discerning young people, Jesuit-educated young people, for recognizing this for what it was. It was a thing of the moment. And in the, with some modicum of sympathy for the writer, it was a terrible moment, right? I mean, we were all in a psychotic state at that point in June of 2020 due to COVID, due to the horrible very public murder of George Floyd, and our having to reckon with our terrible racial injustice, our terrible racial past. The last thing that people wanted to hear was that one of their favorite writers has made racist comments in her letters. It was the last thing people wanted to hear. So it was the easy thing to do to just disown her. And of course, there was a firestorm of controversy after that. Twitter lit up, she's dead to me, I'll never read her books again. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it was people who wanted to rush to her defense and say, that's not possible. Of course she's not a racist, and of course the truth, as always, lies somewhere between those two extremes. So it was interesting that, your film comes into the world around that time. My book ends up getting, treated in a way that it did not deserve to be treated. And then Ethan Hawke has the situation where he's going to make this film. I think it's a marvelous film. I think it's very imaginative, and of course Elizabeth served on as one of the consultants, so it's, of course, it's going to be very imaginative. And it gives you the opportunity to, as Elizabeth mentioned, the way that my book is structured, my first book on O'Connor, my biography of O'Connor, was I knew that, O'Connor is an incarnational writer. The truth is in the work and the way that she embodies her ideas about the world. So every chapter starts with, narrative about her life, and then there's a foundational story. And then the next chapter is something about her life, foundational story, that in some ways brings out these aspects of O'Connor's character that you can see. And that's exactly what Hawke does in the film. So when you go, you get treated not just to your regular biopic, but you get the snapshot of O'Connor when she's a young woman just figuring out her vocation when she's about 23, 24 years old. And then you get access to O'Connor's mind, where the stories get acted out on the screen in a sort of fever dream, and you get to imagine what it must have been like to be her. She overhears a couple of comments on a train, and she invents a story. Poof, all of a sudden, there we are in the yard of Lucy Nell Crader and her daughter in The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And so you really, and he's an artist himself, Hawke, of course. He knows where the ideas come from and the way that they get, manifest. So I think he does a marvelous job with giving us a sense of who Flannery O'Connor was. And he calls it a film that is inspired by the stories of Flannery O'Connor. It's, again, not documentary. There are some scholars who are upset about the fact that he takes liberties with fact, but that you have to, right?
But indeed, I think the film's really about the prayer journal, and so it's about the vocation of the artist. And if you think of watching it a second time, think about that, and the stories just supplement that. And I think that some people read it and say, let's see what the stories are like. But really, this is a film of a prayer journal, of a woman struggling to figure out, I am a great artist. How do I deal with pride and ambition in the context of the cross? How do I find salvation as a redemptive journey as opposed to a win or a lose? And so she's really, so watching it a second time from that perspective, the film kind of, because not that I was taking any problems with Ethan Hawke's stories, but I figured that I could teach this film better with that as the entrance, that this is the vocation of the artist.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree, and this is so nice to have a priest here who agrees with this, because I think the portrayal, and Elizabeth and I might disagree about this a little bit, but it is very hard to find in contemporary film a positive portrayal of Catholicism. Catholicism always ends up looking bad in some way, and let's admit that there are things that happened in the church that it's inevitable that is going to happen to a certain extent. But there is not
the conclave.
Conclave, yeah, exactly.
Have you seen that yet?
No, I'm not going to go see it. It looks ridiculous. Sorry, but this film, there's not a moment of irony. Like the last scene, the next to the last scene, which is this extended confession scene where she is with her confessor, who's a lovely Irish priest, played by Liam Neeson. That's an Easter egg. You'll find, but it's worth seeing. And when he says to her, oh, don't worry, confession and communion will sort you out. And it's like, that's what Catholics believe. That may be absurd to the rest of the world, but that is what Catholics believe. Yes, you have a terminal illness. Yes, you're trying to struggle with your own mortality and whether or not you're meant to be an artist and how you're going to do that. But the sacraments, that's the reality. That's the ground of your being, and that is going to set you right. None of your concerns about your career and how long you have. It's just this very moving and unvarnished encounter of a young woman struggling with her faith, struggling with her doubt. And you just really, it got, I mean, I've been thinking about Flannery O'Connor for 40 years, which is really too long. I know, I started when I was 10. I've been thinking about her for 40 years, and the fact is, I thought about her differently after seeing this film, even if some of the scenes were not, you know, exactly as I might have thought that they should be played. So all of that, I think, again, this speaks to the moment of every generation reinvents the writers and the artists that it has inherited from the past, and we have to reinvent them in terms of what it is that we expect from them.
And if I can just call out Amy Alsnauer again, and who curated a wonderful show at Emory University that featured Flannery O'Connor, Alice Walker, and Vinnie Andrews, and showed an excerpt from our doc in it, had photographs, but also directly addressed, because Alice Walker has been called out for some of her anti-Semitic statements, and Vinnie Andrews, who was the black artist who had who had represented Flannery O'Connor's story, even as he wrote publicly about understanding problematic racist statements that he read of hers. So it's just a wonderful exhibition in another way, I think, for the Catholic imagination to show the conflict. It's not running from the conflict. It's not, you know, smoothing over it. It's dialectically putting it in face to each other and having a conversation. So it's one of the things that came after Wildcat, too, around the same time. I just wanted to, it's well worth bringing to other parts of the country.
Do you want to?
Yeah, and I would, just to conclude with this kind of idea of like what we have to do finally is, yes, we know Flannery O'Connor, the person, was imperfect. Shocker, right? Really, really a shock. A shock that a woman who grew up in the 50s and 60s had some, in the South during the Civil Rights Movement, had some racial ideas that we hope to God that we don't have now, right? But the proof is in her stories. We have to go to the stories and see what she does there, finally. And that's why I love the fact that your film, Hawke's film, it's like you let the stories speak, even though O'Connor is imperfect. And so, by the way, was Dante and Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and just about all of the artists in the Western tradition that we admire. And we need to figure out how to live with those contradictions.
So we'll open it up to questions. We have a microphone here if there are any questions. And I'll start with one. First, I want to say your review of Wildcat in America is really notable.
Thank you.
Walker Percy was being interviewed about Catholic literature, and he said in America, he said, well, most American Catholic literature, showing his own bias here, I'll say, is Irish Catholic. And he mentioned Edwin O'Connor, and then he said, then there's Flannery, but she's a Georgia fundamentalist. So to come, and I asked this question to somebody with a Roman Catholic father and a Southern Baptist mother, talk about that reconciliation or not reconciling it in the film.
So I would say that we wanted to make sure that we located Flannery in her experience, which was she was part of a small Catholic community that had existed since the time of, of the first Irish coming into Savannah. So there was this legacy, but they were very small, and they learned how to live in the South, right? They tended to be landowners, at least her clan was, and so there was a sense that they were part of the upper middle class of the South. But they really did have to kind of, their Catholicism was basically something that was shared within, not without. They were Southerners otherwise, right? So I think that Flannery kind of lived in that in-between space where the manners of the South, the manners of a kind of a Protestant hegemony did exist, and she lived in that world. And I mean, everyone said that, boy, that's Regina's daughter. She's just like, she's the most mannered person, and then she's got these crazy stories, right? How does that disconnect happen in their minds? And at the same time, going to Mass every single day, knowing the Rosary, the Eucharist is a kind of the source and summit of her life. And so I do think that making sure that we remember that you can be this outsider on the inside, if that makes sense. And you're, but on the outside, but in her manners, she's living in a world, and so I think she has, it's given her a lot of energy to play upon that kind of dialectical Southern witness and that more contemplative, analogous world of sacraments and stuff like that.
So I was just going to add real quick that Flannery's best friend, Mariette Lee, one of them, was a Lutheran, had a divinity degree, a Protestant divinity degree, and Catholic was, Flannery was practically a theologian too. So and her good friendship with Betty Hester also was very much about theological debate. And she was interested in Judaism too. So her awareness and so my own sort of Protestant interest, I was interested in her understanding of that area.
Sir. My reading of secondary literature on Flannery O'Connor will never outpace the hundreds of pages that I've read on her written by high school seniors. And the challenge that I often give is she talks about pay attention to the movements of grace in the characters and not to the dead bodies. I think that in a way you've done that with her life today. And I kind of had two questions. One, is that easier to portray in a visual medium, movements of grace, than just with words on a page? And secondly, because I've found this in my teaching, that teaching them to look for the movements of grace and not necessarily for the dead bodies is also a way of teaching them to read their own lives and their own reality.
That's beautiful. I think you're absolutely right. I teach a Flannery O'Connor seminar I'll teach it next year for the anniversary of her birth, but every third semester we read all of Flannery O'Connor. I mean, from the beginning, we just read everything. And we have to kind of start with that same, there's a lot of dead bodies, okay, now let's just stop what's going on. And then what comes next? Do you read another story, or do you maybe read part of Mystery and Manners to enter into a kind of, oh, that's a different way to look at it. And so the first 4 weeks of teaching Flannery O'Connor is like, can you find the key? Because once you find the key, it's just a glorious trip through storytelling, right? But if you don't find that key, and so part of finding that key is dealing with the N-word and racism, and so just gauging students through the beginning, middle, and end to say, how do you see that? They always say, to that article, they say, no, to the same thing, it doesn't ring true, having read everything she did. So I do think that, inviting those students into finding what Flannery O'Connor has written that's not a story, to kind of augment or to kind of complement, gives them a key. And once you get the key, like I said, they get it. They're actually looking for the grace. They're looking for the moment of violence that's going to explode upon as an insight for, if not the character, then the reader.
Yeah, and I would just remind us also of something that we know, particularly as a Catholic writer, O'Connor is an incarnational writer. And I absolutely believe that the more that students and young people and all readers really can see these stories embodied by other human beings. So even if it's imperfectly embodied in an actress like Maya Hawke, by the way, I think she did a fantastic job. A friend of ours, who's a wonderful dramaturg, Karen Coonrod, has a company of actors called Compagnia di Calambari, who for the last 15 years, or maybe longer, has been doing dramatizations of one of O'Connor's stories, Everything That Rises Must Converge, and now she's working on Revelation. And these stories are so powerful to see them on the stage. Even though I've read the thing hundreds of times, it's nothing like watching these people enact these roles and speak these lines that Flannery meant to be spoken. So I think that every opportunity that we can give people to hear and see these stories, well, we do see the dead bodies, but we definitely see the grace. So.
And as we get another question in, could we comment very quickly on the films? I'm thinking of Wise Blood from the 70s. I was in Macon 15 years later when I began my career, and it didn't seem radically different. Could you give us just your thoughts artistically, or if these three directors captured her in the films from the 50s to the 70s?
Certainly.
Should we take the 2 questions?
Is it next?
Okay.
Go ahead. Oh, no. Oh.
Oh, if you'll respond on the other films, just so we can.
Yeah. Wise Blood's a great film. How about that? John Huston's one of our great directors in film history, and Michael Fitzgerald, who is Sally Fitzgerald's son.
Godson. Flannery O'Connor's godson.
Flannery O'Connor's godson remembers her, was a young filmmaker, and he just had the nerve to contact John Huston and say, would you think about adapting Wise Blood? And we have a whole section in the documentary about adapting Wise Blood and how John Huston was an atheist. But by the end of the film, he said to Michael Fitzgerald's brother, he said, you know, I think Flannery wins out here. Jesus wins.
Which reminds us of Flannery's famous statement where she said, you know, a lot of people think I'm a hillbilly nihilist, but I'm really a hillbilly Thomist. And so Huston was one of those people who think, oh, she's a hillbilly nihilist. And it's like, nope,
yeah,
she's a Thomist.
Okay, well, oddly enough, this is exactly my question. So I'm aware that in guided academic settings, whether in high school or in undergraduate school, or even better in graduate school, Flannery O'Connor can be deployed and people can be taught to look for the moment of grace and they can discover that. But do people do that outside of a situation? If somebody comes into contact with these works without that context, is it just a cool, weird story? Or do they get something more out of it? Does it open itself in the same way to non-Catholic readers in a non-guided setting?
I'll start with that because I think that my students, after I just randomly always choose one story. Not always good, man, it's hard to find. And a lot of people have not read Flannery O'Connor. And their first paper is, what happened? And they will say that they'll use, it's like a response paper more than it's an essay. You know, something was, I mean, I felt something, but I don't know what I felt. Or they'll say, yeah, it was so funny, and then it was not funny. And then it was scary. And then I was like, so just getting them to kind of claim the fact that there's a surplus of something going on, that there's something more going on, before you kind of go in and say, okay, now let's see if we can find the key. To that point, I think you can read Flannery O'Connor and not be a Catholic and really love Flannery O'Connor because of the way that she talks about the foibles of the human person. I think if you have that Catholic imagination kind of shaped and formed in either in a classroom or in life, you get so much deeper into that, and you can reread it and see how that gets played out. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but there really is a sense that if you just ask students who don't know anything about Flannery, in my 20 years of teaching her, they always get that something important is going on here, but I don't know what it is.
Well, and we were just talking about Donnie Darko,
yeah.
And as a sort of entry point to Graham Greene's story of the Destructors. And, you know, most of the young people who've seen Donnie Darko or watched sort of this cult film that's, you know, really troubling and about mental health and murder, all kinds of things. The Graham Greene gets referenced in the film. Well, that's a perfect opportunity to go from the film then into the literature and dive deeper. But I think the really great stories, and I think Wise Blood does this too. It's like, what, you know, you don't quite know what's going on here, but hopefully it'll bring you back, as we hope with their documentary, bring you back to reading her fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different view of this. We were going to talk about this actually in our panel on Saturday when we sort of look at what people have said about O'Connor over the years, the first 99 years, you know, and what's coming next. And when Robert Fitzgerald and Sally Fitzgerald published O'Connor's essays and also her letters in the late 60s, early 70s, it sort of opened people's eyes. People were like, oh, we're going to read these stories now very differently. Now we know she's a Catholic, and not just a Catholic, but a very serious, very intentional Catholic. And so since then, really, there's been a lot of controversy in the criticism on O'Connor as to whether or not do Christians read this story differently, people who believe in Christianity read these stories differently than people who are basically nihilists. And I think they do. I think, for example, the Coen brothers have stolen all of their humor, all of their bits from O'Connor. They love to yoke violence and humor, you know, the guys stuffed in the wood chipper, we know all those scenes, right? That's all very O'Connor-esque, and they know that. The difference, of course, is that O'Connor is operating from out of a system, a belief, a foundational worldview of belief, in which violence isn't absurd at all. Violence is very meaningful. It is the cross. It is the means through which one arrives at the resurrection. You can't get over death, which is a violent event. The Coen brothers don't have that. They're not operating out of that worldview. They have kind of taken her aesthetic, taken her style, and they're using it for wonderful effects, but not the way that she used it. And I don't know if it's because they want to just willfully misread her or because, again, they don't believe in that. And so why should they have that be part of their world? And I think there are a number of other artists who do this too, to a certain extent. Maybe Martin McDonagh in some of his films, which are obviously very O'Connor inspired. So I think that, as you say, people can use her, deploy her in different ways depending upon whether or not they assent to the kind of theology that's behind the stories. Because I still have students, you know, the first time they encounter a good man is hard to find. It's that old lady was just going to say anything to get out of being killed. You know, it's not that she arrives at some moment of grace, and it's just ridiculous, all those dead bodies. And it's like, and then I have to school them. That's really not what she meant. So it's an interesting problem, I think, in O'Connor.
And I'm just thinking as you're talking that it was important for us to make it onto PBS and for our documentary to very much be not just to be taught in Catholic high schools or colleges, but for a general audience with any kind of background in any kind of religion. And this is the story of this history. And that includes, I think, the history of the Catholic literary imagination here in the U.S. So it's significant that everyone should know it.
So we're going to take a final question, and then we'll have a summary for y'all. We have a little less than 5 minutes left. Thank you.
So it's 60 years since her passing, and 99 since her birth. It seems, in just kind of my observation, especially over the last decade, that there's some type of a holy convergence of many different strands of thought and outlooks. Perhaps up to this point, or up to maybe a decade ago, it was pretty much kept in schools and the academy. But now and this is where my question is this kind of a Flannery moment in terms of as we move forward, and what does that look like?
I think that's going to be a little bit of tomorrow's engagement. I will say this much. I was always fascinated. I think what's kept Flannery O'Connor going in the ups and the downs, especially it has been Catholic schools and Catholic universities and Catholic scholars. However, so many artists just loved her work that they were going to keep Flannery O'Connor up to the present, because they all speak of her as like, if you can grapple with Flannery O'Connor and what she had to go through, then you can grapple with your own art, right? It didn't make it into our film, but Tobias Wolff at Stanford said, at his MFA program, he made everybody read Flannery O'Connor, not to become Flannery O'Connor, but you have to go through Flannery O'Connor. So that the writers, the creative writer can learn something from her life and from her craft. And so I think that kind of keeps her always kind of in the limelight on that level. And then we do have a moment now, but I think I'm going to have my colleagues say more.
Well, I'll just say, the producer who did Wildcat, I am helping, and he has the rights to The Violent Bear It Away, a lot of her O'Connor short stories. He's got scripts, one set in Poland, another script's for The Violent Bear It Away. He's got the rights to Walker Percy's Lancelot. So I think it's a moment for the Catholic literary imagination, honestly. So if anyone's interested in investing in more films, I know who you can call and have the pitch deck for you. So I do think it is. I think it's a moment for this conference, really.
Yeah, I agree. It's a moment for exactly the reasons Mark said. We just saw a fantastic panel. Some of you may have seen it earlier, which was about George Saunders, Toni Morrison, and Bruce Springsteen, all very different artists who were formed in some way by going through O'Connor. It's her craft that interests them, as well as what it is that she has to say. They all also happen to be Catholics. But on the grace question, I think, and this is the reason people want to reject her. I mean, I don't think the person who wrote that article realizes the implications of it. There are English departments across this country that will not put Flannery O'Connor on their syllabus because they do not want to be accused by their students of being racist, and they do not want to lose their jobs. So, I mean, that's lasting damage that we're still trying to do the damage control on this 4 years later, right? It's very problematic. But that is exactly the reason I think she is the writer for our moment, because she is a person who is conflicted about race. She is somebody who was socialized in a racist culture. She knows that she has these vestiges of racism that she needs to deal with, because for the sake of her soul, for her salvation, she needs to deal with it. And this is why she comes back to it again and again in her stories. So we can learn so much about our own ongoing conflict with race, as whatever our race is, but particularly if we're white Americans and we are the inheritors, of white privilege. What can we learn from Flannery O'Connor in the struggles that all of us face to a certain extent, having been formed in a society that is racially constructed, that certain people benefit and certain people don't, and also as Catholics who believe in sin and know that we are all subject to it. So I think she's the writer for our moment for those reasons as well.
Not that we're biased.
I would just say, see the film. If you're a teacher or a professor, the documentary does become a way. I'm tooting our own horn, but I'm doing it because I really think we made this film as a doorway into Flannery O'Connor's work. If you ever want to see, Elizabeth and I can get you the film. It's also on Amazon Prime, and it's also on PBS.
Alexander Street Press.
Alexander Street Press.
University Library.
And you can also just get it from me if you want. And I say it only because I think that it does allow all those issues to rise in a cinematic way, so that as you go through Flannery O'Connor, you have an experience a little bit deeper than just kind of plunging right in. Mm-hmm. So that's how I'd like to end. Last word.
Well, I just was literally thinking, I'm like, John, thank you for that NEH grant, because we could not have done it truly without the National Endowment for the Humanities, and I know you're no longer there, but how important it is to institutionally have some government money to help fund documentaries and storytelling that are looking at these questions, that really want to closely examine faith and race and literary storytelling.
Thank you so much. Can we hear a word for our panel? Elizabeth, Mark, and Angela, thank